The lights in the studio burned bright, casting an artificial warmth over the sleek modern set. The audience was packed, journalists, analysts, and political enthusiasts eager to witness what had been advertised as an exclusive and unfiltered conversation with Melania Trump. For months, the former First Lady had largely avoided mainstream media, focusing instead on her humanitarian projects and private life. But tonight, she had agreed to sit down for a rare interview, one that the media had been salivating over. Her interviewer? Jonathan Reeves, a seasoned political journalist known for his aggressive questioning and thinly veiled hostility toward the Trump family. This was his chance. He had built a reputation on cornering politicians, exposing their flaws, and pressing where it hurt the most. And tonight, his target was Melania. She entered the studio with effortless grace, wearing a sleek white blazer over a fitted black dress, her hair styled in soft waves. The audience greeted her with applause, though there were unmistakable pockets of skeptics waiting for the moment she would stumble. As she took her seat across from Reeves, she offered a warm yet reserved smile. Her demeanor was calm, poised, the very definition of unshakable composure. "Mrs. Trump, thank you for joining us tonight." "It is my pleasure." Reeves glanced down at his prepared questions, each one meticulously crafted to provoke, to extract sound bites that would dominate headlines by morning. "You've been relatively private since leaving the White House, focusing more on your initiatives than speaking publicly. Why now? Why this interview?" Melania nodded slightly. "Because I believe in speaking when I have something meaningful to say, not just to be part of the noise." The audience murmured at her subtle jab at modern media. Reeves smirked. He was ready to take this further. "Let's get right to it then. Your time in the White House was controversial, to say the least. Many critics argue that you stayed silent too often, that you refused to take a stance when it mattered. Do you regret not being more vocal?" Melania's expression remained unchanged. "No, I do not regret being true to myself. You see, Mr. Reeves, there is a difference between speaking and being heard. When I spoke, I made sure my words mattered. The people who wanted to listen, listened. The people who didn't, never would." A soft applause rippled through the audience. Reeves nodded, but there was a glint of something sharp in his eyes. He was building up to something bigger. He adjusted in his chair, leaned in slightly, and his tone dropped just a bit, signaling that he was about to go in for the kill. "Let's talk about your marriage." The room fell eerily silent. Melania remained perfectly still, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. She had expected this. Reeves continued. "There has been endless speculation about the nature of your relationship with Donald Trump. You've seen the headlines, articles suggesting that your marriage is purely for appearances, that you are nothing more than a political accessory." Melania's lips pressed together. She remained composed, unreadable. Reeves pushed further. "People have analyzed every interaction, every public moment, videos of you swatting his hand away, your reserved body language. They say you are trapped, that you are miserable. So, Mrs. Trump, tell us the truth. What is your marriage really like?" The audience leaned forward, hungry for her response. Melania exhaled softly, but there was no sign of discomfort. Instead, she smiled. And then she spoke. "You know, Mr. Reeves, I have always found it interesting how people who have never met me seem to believe they know me so well." Reeves' smirk wavered slightly. "Let me ask you something," Melania continued. "How often does the media analyze the marriages of other first ladies?" Reeves hesitated. "Well, there's always public interest in—" "Ah," she interrupted smoothly, "but not like this. Not with the same level of obsession, the same eagerness to assume the worst." Reeves shifted slightly in his chair. Melania tilted her head as if studying him. "Why do you think that is, Mr. Reeves?" The journalist was visibly thrown off. This was not how this was supposed to go. The audience was entirely silent now, watching a game unfold that Reeves was no longer controlling. He swallowed before speaking. "Well, I think it's because your marriage is different." Melania let out a small, knowing laugh. "Different? Of course." She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but piercing. "Tell me, Mr. Reeves, if I sat here and told you my marriage was perfect, would you believe me?" Reeves hesitated. I mean, that depends." "Exactly," Melania said smoothly. No answer I give will ever satisfy you because you have already decided what you want the truth to be. The audience erupted into applause. Reeves looked genuinely taken aback. He opened his mouth, but Melania wasn't finished. She sat back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other with the grace of a seasoned chess player, watching her opponent realize they had just lost the game. People will always see what they want to see. And those who spend their time obsessed with my marriage, perhaps they should take a closer look at their own, the audience roared. Reeves, for the first time in his career, looked completely at a loss for words. And the interview wasn't even over yet. The studio was electric. Melania Trump had just turned the tables on Jonathan Reeves, and everyone knew it. The audience, filled with journalists, political analysts, and spectators who had expected her to be put on the defensive, now watched in stunned silence. Reeves shifted in his chair, his confidence noticeably shaken. He had thought this would be like any other interview, that he could poke, prod, and extract sensational headlines at Melania's expense. But she had refused to play his game. Instead, she had played him. He cleared his throat, forcing a thin smile. That was quite an answer, Mrs. Trump. Melania tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. I'm glad you think so. Reeves, desperate to regain control, gripped his cue cards tightly and tried again. But surely you understand why people have questions. The hand-swatting incidents, the long periods of separation, the reserved body language. Melania held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Let me ask you something, Mr. Reeves. Reeves hesitated. Go ahead. Melania's gaze sharpened. Are you married? A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Reeves' jaw tightened slightly. Yes, I am. Melania nodded. And tell me, does your wife always hold your hand in public? Reeves blinked, caught completely off guard. Well, not always, but has she ever pulled away? Even once. Reeves paused, suddenly realizing where this was going. I mean, sure, I guess. Melania leaned forward slightly, her tone cool yet direct. And if someone took that one moment, that 2-second clip, and put it on television 1,000 times, what would the world say about your marriage? The audience roared with applause. Reeves froze, his face turning slightly red. He tried to regain his footing, but the damage was already done. Melania continued, her voice calm yet piercing. You see, Mr. Reeves, this is the problem. You and your colleagues do not report the truth. You report what you think will get the most views. You take a second of a person's life and turn it into a headline. Reeves swallowed. Melania smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that invited more questioning. It was the kind that said, I know exactly what you're doing, and I will not fall for it. She sat back, elegantly adjusting her white blazer. My marriage is exactly that. Mine. The audience exploded into applause. Reeves glanced at the teleprompter, realizing there were only minutes left in the segment. He had one final chance to regain control. With a forced chuckle, he decided to pivot. All right, Mrs. Trump, let's move on. I want to ask you about your time in the White House. Melania simply nodded. Many people believe you didn't do enough as First Lady. You focused on small initiatives instead of tackling major national issues. Some say you were disengaged. Melania remained poised, but this time, she let out a small laugh. Small initiatives? She repeated, raising an eyebrow. Reeves nodded. Melania leaned forward slightly, her voice even and firm. Be Best, my campaign, helping children, mental health, anti-bullying. You call these small initiatives? I call them helping people who need it most. A wave of murmurs moved through the audience. Reeves tried to interrupt, but Melania did not let him. You see, Mr. Reeves, my husband built towers. I built futures. The audience erupted into applause. Melania paused, letting the impact of her words settle. The problem is, people like you, people who want a story more than the truth, never cared about what I was doing, because it was easier to say I was doing nothing. Reeves looked visibly uncomfortable. He opened his mouth to respond, but Melania wasn't finished. I could have done everything you wanted me to do. I could have spoken more, smiled more, been louder, and still you would have said it was not enough, because it was never about what I did. It was about who I am. The audience was on its feet now, cheering loudly. Reeves knew he had lost. The producers signaled that time was running out. He had one last question. He forced a smile, leaning back in his chair. Mrs. Trump, do you ever think about what your legacy will be? Melania met his gaze without hesitation. I do. Reeves waited. Melania paused, then said, and I will let history decide. The studio went silent. The entire audience erupted into applause one last time. The segment ended not with Reeves controlling the narrative, but with Melania Trump standing taller than ever. By the time Melania walked off set, the internet was already exploding. Melania Trump destroys reporter in live interview. Watch the moment that stunned the studio. Journalist tries to corner Melania Trump. She turns the tables instantly. Melania Trump's interview goes viral. Her response silences the media. Twitter was flooded with reactions. Melania just handled that like a boss. I've never seen a journalist get owned so gracefully. Whether you love or hate the Trumps, that was an iconic response. Even news anchors had to admit, Melania had walked into a hostile interview and walked out stronger than ever. Reeves? He spent the following days trying to spin the story. I wasn't trying to attack her, just asking tough questions. She dodged a lot of things, let's be honest. But the damage was already done. Melania Trump had just reminded the world why she should never be underestimated. And as for her legacy, she was writing it in real time. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to grow. What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below.